The first Stasis was in a way I felt was sort of like gore for gore's sake. I was quite young when I actually did it, and I just wanted to sort of make something as gross as possible. That's why I've got parts where like you do spinal surgery on yourself, and you find somebody fused to a tree, and then when we did Beautiful Desolation, I found that I more enjoyed sort of like subtle, disturbing gore. So the we've got a race in Beautiful Desolation called the Tribulationists, and they're essentially cyborgs that have their skin removed. There's something very disturbing about that. And then when we went into Bone Totem, I think I described it as beautiful horror was what I wanted to do, like beautiful gore. The gore had to have a sense of artistry to it.
It couldn't just be gore for gore's sake. And I think that sometimes, horror is kind of devolved these days into like multiple jump scares and really horrible, gory, messy scenes. And I don't know if that really scares or resonates with people anymore. They might look away, but that doesn't really do anything for their...
It's not going to stick in your mind for the next, 2 or 3 weeks.
So when we're like, how can we create imagery and experiences that will resonate with people, that'll actually mean something to them? So the gore in Bone Totem was actually quite sparse as compared to Stasis. But when it does happen, it is quite visceral, because also we don't just have like so for instance, in the first part of the game, there's a guy who's been just saying this sounds really gross, but he's been skinned. So he's like a skinned guy, and he's got these flowers placed in his eye sockets. And then over there is a horrible image. But if you read his diary that is lying next to him, you can kind of humanize that character a little more, and that then gory image actually means more to you than if it is just some random image that you saw.
And then it was also sort of like take his skin and then little carvings, little intricate notes inside his actual skin. So the gore became almost like an art piece. And there's actually the Alex Garland movie Annihilation was a really big influence. That the gore in that movie, there's this incredible part where this person's been fused with like mushrooms, and they're kind of like splayed out on the wall. And it's disgusting to look at, but it's absolutely beautiful. And we really tried to bring in those sort of aspects of beauty with the gore.
The Last of Us did it as well.
Yes.
The monsters are beautiful and horrible looking, but they're still pretty. It's still like there's something that makes you want to look at it, but it's So I think that we didn't want to do, like Chris said, Stasis had Stasis 1 had a lot of gore for gore's sake, but we kind of wanted to make it. I'm squarish. I don't like blood and stuff like that, so I don't. Even
you don't like
horror movies that so much.
You don't like blood and stuff. What?
I'm a little baby. I get scared of these horror movies and stuff. I gotta look away. The scariest movie I've ever watched is what's it? The Paranormal Activity. That scared the hell out of me. I can't take those psychological. And mainly that movie scared me because I've got a really active imagination, and I kind of
filled in the blanks.
You fill in the blanks over there. So we kind of tried to do that as well. Like Chris said earlier, with the narrative, we tried to just fill in the blanks. But with the gore and stuff and the horror aspects of the game, we've also tried to fill in the blanks. We didn't overtly say what had happened here, but we gave kind of hints to what had happened in certain areas, and then we have kind of a visual representation of what happened there. But we don't go to extreme gross detail with videos or whatever. We just kind of try and play on the player's mind of what could happen there.
The really funny thing is, as you're saying this, I'm sort of going through the list in my head of the gory moments in Bone Totem, and we've got sort of like the shark that gets thawed out, that stomach is still pumping, and it's like, who thought of that?
Well,
Sick bastard.
I love horror. I don't like real world horror. Like there's movies like The Strangers and those sort of like home invasion movies that I don't like that. I like my cosmic horror. I like my super weird horror. I like my science fiction horror. But for me, the important part of every horrific moment was it had to have a character attached to it to give it a bit of depth. It can't just be like random blood spatter against the wall. And there has to be something that happened before and that led to the horrific moment. So, for example, the guy there's a part where a surgical robot has basically been constantly doing the same surgery on one body for several days, probably a couple of months at that point. And there was just something very disturbing about the idea of having this robot just in this single loop, just mulching away at a person.
Another thing was like another horror sort of element was there's this one passage that you come to that Mac actually finds, and there's like all these suitcases of the people, and there's like a little bit of blood on some of them. There's like all these empty suitcases, and you kind of wonder, what were they? Why were there's bullet holes in the wall as well?
Yeah.
So we don't have to literally show dead people that, but we can kind of once again
half the story behind how it got there.
Harp on those little story moments where like the player's imagination is always going to be worse than anything we can pick up.
Yeah.
So,
I can
just prompt them in a direction.
I can give you an example, like the suitcases. I'm from Krakow, which is not that far from Auschwitz.
Yes.
And when you visit the museum, you have a lot of places in the museum, and you have like things that belong to people, and you know what happened to them, and you see the rest. So like when you see such an image, it makes such a visceral reaction,
Yes.
So like a less experienced person would have a video of what happened to them, but we're like, I suppose also our budget plays into it as well. We have to kind of work with what we've got, which is not a lot. So we've got to kind of say, okay, well, we've got a week to do this whole area. What can we do? We can't do an FMV video here. We've got to just kind of keep it really simple. What can we do to kind of will evoke the emotion that needs to be reached at this area? We'll look at things like the color palettes. We'll look at things like what dialogue is spoken here. In that particular scene, there's a subtle radio playing with people's voices in the background. We try to be as clever as possible.
Yeah.
Where I think that if it was like, if it was a Marvel movie, they literally would have shown people being shot with their luggage.
Yes, but
I don't think it would have the same impact, if that makes sense.
Exactly, like in the Marvel movie, you would see like death on the screen, and it would be like kind of random people, so like nobody would care.
Yes,
kind of in like Star Wars, at some point, like you should like thousands of clones die, but they are like clones. They don't have any meaning. And here when you show anything that is gore, it produces visceral reaction because it's always meaningful. It's always tied to this person, and it's not like
one of the most sort of like heartbreaking things that I've actually read was the Pulse nightclub shooting, and it, absolutely horrific what happened. And afterwards, the cops were going in, and they were sort of like trying to sort of like clear the area. And they heard this ringing, and they couldn't figure out what it was. And they realized that there had obviously been a news report that had gone out that there was a shooting at Pulse nightclub, and the ringing was everybody's cell phones of their loved ones trying to get a hold of them. And that, to me, the thought of going into a space and hearing those ringing is more horrific than any amount of violence and gore that you could possibly show. And I think there's a very sort of human emotion that we have to the idea of people being hurt.
I think also because you kind of care about the characters, Mac, Charlie, and Moses, that are exploring the spaces in Totem. You can kind of viscerally understand what they're feeling and emoting at the same time. We kind of tried to create as close a connection to those characters that they weren't just these kind of pure avatars of the player. They literally were little breathing characters in this world, and I think that also resonated. Well, watching people play the playthroughs and stuff, and the let's plays and Twitch streaming and stuff. When they see those things, they react beyond as someone reacted. They just saw a picture of that. I think it's everything. It's the sound. It's the imagery. It's the content of the imagery, as well as the characters that are discovering the area as well.
Okay, we've been going for an hour. I think we deserve a little bit break, and then we can get back to the gamey parts of Stasis.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay?
Sounds good.